Hello, in this lesson we're going to talk about configuring workflows and workflow templates. So you should remember from the previous video on the spaces that a lot of people use a space for sort of like a dashboard for a process. So if 5 different people and groups need to go in and make sure that a status or an order or an employee onboarding application is in a certain process or a certain stage in a process, you can create a space for that and use the fields for it. However, in the case of a more linear workflow or a reminder type system, we have a tool called Workflow here in Drivve that you can use to remind other people to do things. You can create templates, and it's all based off this linear process map. So the first thing that you're going to want to do as an administrator is log in and maybe create some new workflow templates down here that are available to people to use to map the process. But just by default, there's one called Remind Others, which is the user can select and remind as a one-step workflow to another user. There's also a reminder which automatically goes to that logged on user. And there's a reminder with resubmission where the user can send a workflow off to another user or group, and then it'll automatically come back to them in a second step. So what we're going to do here is create a new workflow template called new invoice, and we'll give it a description. We'll say accounts payable, approve new invoice. And so what we want here is when the workflow comes in, we want users to be able to send it off for approval and payment. So we'll make this available to everybody because all users should be able to kick this workflow off. And the first step is we'll call it approval. And we're going to give it to a group, and that group is going to be the accounting admins. And we'll say that it needs to take 1 day for approval. And then after that, if it's been approved, we want it to go to booking. That should be a group here called accounting. And we'll give another day for that. And then maybe at the very end, we can say we want it to go to the currently logged on user for booked and paid. And we'll send it back to that logged on user as a notification that the invoice that they requested to be paid was paid. So I'll save that, and you see here now we have a new invoice workflow there, and let's show you how that's actually going to work. So what I'm going to do is use that desktop plugin that we set up earlier to drag this invoice that I got as an email into my scans folder. Remember, if I were in Outlook or Word, I could also just use the plugin that way. And so here I have an invoice, and I'm going to select which path it is. And let's say it's going to be accounts payable. Okay. And the space, I know that this is for B's Beverages. So that's who I'm going to send it in for. The invoice number 1234. PO number, maybe I don't have one in this case, but that's okay. I'm also going to put it in my inbox, and I'm going to archive that document. So Bobby Hill is just archived an invoice. I'm logged in here as Bobby Hill, and I'm going to go into my inbox now, and there's that document that I just put in my inbox. It's all been filled out. What I want to do is kick a workflow off for it now, though. So if I select the document and then select the workflow button, I can select that new invoice template that we just created, and I could add a little note that says like, hey, this was for the party balloons. Okay, and I'm going to save the workflow and the index values here, and I'm also going to move it out of my inbox. And so the document's been moved out of my inbox, and now if I go to workflows here, you see that that one appears, and the reason why that one appears is because Bobby is actually in the group that was the first step in that process. So here I see my workflows. I see that this one has not yet been claimed because there's a pending status. As soon as I claim it, you see that it turns blue, and that means that now I can open the workflow up, and this is what a workflow looks like in Drivve. So I can view the document. I could open it up and view all the index fields and things like that. I also have all the information about the workflow, so the space and the priority. I can see the workflow notes that have been created. And here, after I've approved it, I can send it off into booking, and I would do that with the complete button down here. If I needed to get another bit of information from somebody else before I send it off or approve it, or let's say I needed to go back to the originator, I could add a new step here that says, please confirm the charges, and I could send it back to a specific user or to a group, and that's going to add a step there. I can also delete a step by using that minus button right there. And if I want to discontinue the workflow, I can either rewind it to a previous step if it's a rejection thing or I need to send it back to the person who sent it to me, or I can discontinue the workflow completely. So I'm going to go ahead and complete that, send it off. You see that it's no longer in my inbox here as Bobby Hill, but what I can do is if I show the filters up here, I can search for all workflows that have a certain status, or for instance, all workflows that are a certain template or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead here and log in as Sally, which is who we sent that workflow off to. And you should see down here that Sally has in her workflow section that workflow that was just sent along. And so I can claim it. And let's say I realize that it's a bad workflow or it's an incorrect invoice. I'm going to reject it. I'm going to discontinue it. I'm going to say not applicable. So I discontinue the workflow. It's completely gone. And that's that. I can also create workflows. Let's say, for instance, if I wanted to find a document that was created today, and I select that workflow, I can create workflows with a unique template here. So if I select new workflow and the template is none, I can say, well, I want the first step to be to Bobby, and I want the second step to be to the accounting group, and I want to save that. So we can create workflows on the fly, and we can create them with whichever type status we want. Also, if I find a document there, I can see the workflows for that document and the audit trail for what status that workflow is in. And if I select it, it'll actually take me to that workflow. So let's say if I pick that one up, I think actually Sally needs permission to view other people's workflows, but if you had that, it'll take you to see the workflow itself. Another option that we have is to add to an existing workflow. So if I have a document selected and I have workflows in my inbox, I can select that workflow that I have in possession and add this document to that current workflow. So one last thing, I'm going to show you how the filter works for the workflow. If a user has, in the right section, I'm logged in as an admin now, if the user has the ability to manage workflows and monitor workflows, that means that they'll be able to see other people's workflows and see what status they're in. So now if I log out and I log back in as Sally, and I find that document, then I should be able to go into the workflow and see its history. And you see there that that's where it was canceled, and there's a note for why it was canceled. If I have that permission, I'll always also be able to open up the workflow section filters here and look for workflows that are assigned to anybody, or I can look by the template or the date or anything like that. So I want to say I want to find all new invoice workflows that are of any status that were maybe created this week, and that'll give me that one invoice workflow that was created. So if we want to give people the ability to monitor other workflows, we can add that right to the right section. You could also create an additional right that is only that checkbox, and you can only grant that to certain users. Remember that it's additive. So in conclusion, the workflow is a very simple way to deal with task management and to really really kill email as a way for people in the company to keep track of what they're supposed to be doing with each other.